However, this afternoon we're very pleased and privileged to have a session from an international speaker, and the topic is Peoples and Profits. How can CHASS help? And Harsh will be speaking about how Australia's vibrant humanities, arts and social sciences can contribute more to international understanding between people and countries, to advancing Australia's interests in Asia, and how CHASS itself can be a model that other countries can and should use. At the same time, given his business and policy background, he will discuss how it makes sense for both policymakers and businesses across Asia and Australia to use humanities, arts and social sciences to both make better policy and earn higher profits. Interesting that we have a non-profit organisation and higher profits mentioned in the same sentence. Harsh is and I should give him his full title, Harsh Shrivastava, I hope that's pretty close, is an innovative policy strategist. He's a consultant to the Planning Commission of India. He's an expert who has led innovative projects across multiple sectors. He currently consults to the Planning Commission of India and is working on the 12th plan, an innovation aimed to improve the Commission's current 5-year planning processes. He is also the independent director of the Meghalaya Institute of Entrepreneurship in India, which was established by the government of the state of Meghalaya to promote entrepreneurship among the youth, the farmers, rural craftspersons and others in the state. Very broad audience. Early this year, Harsh was an Emerging Leaders Fellow at the Australia-India Institute, the University of Melbourne. Previously, he was a Director of Confederation of Indian Industry, CII, India's largest and most respected business association. He's also served as the Deputy Speechwriter to former Prime Minister Vajpayee, a corporate executive with one of India's leading financial services firms, a journalist with Business World, the largest selling Indian business magazine, and he also co-wrote, in his spare time obviously, The Business of Social Responsibility, India's first book on corporate social responsibility. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Harsh.
Thank you. Can we get this? Yeah. Okay, I'd like to start by saying that John Simmons, who was here earlier, said that, he made the point that very few people in India are interested in Australia, whereas Australians are interested in India. I'd like to refute that by saying I, in particular, are extremely interested in what is happening in India, in Australia, and that I find many more people who come to Australia who find that the way Australia works, the way you think, the way you organize yourself is of much learning and much value to us, and I'm part of that learning to see the processes of how Australia works. So here's the topic that I've decided to talk about. But, I realized that this is after lunch blues. This is going to be a very difficult session, and we're running late. So I thought, let me set myself a high bar. And I'm hoping that we will actually have a fantastic session. And here's what I mean by fantastic. Finding a new track for how humanities, arts, social sciences can achieve international cooperation. So I hope at the end of this that there will be some of this and some of the other topic, which was about businesses and how the connection between business. So let's jump straight into this. As I think about when I see Australia, a little that I've seen, that it seems that businesses seem to drive everything. Government is also all around what business wants. There's a productivity commission. The former director of this agency, she's gone to head some other part of the Department of Employment and Productivity. Or there are so many offices abroad who are in trade, Austrade. If you look at the debates of the COAG, they seem to talk about business issues, and it seems to be that, even if you look at universities, it is the business schools and law schools that have the fancy gleaming buildings, and it seems to me that even, all the work around science, a lot of the work, not all, but a lot of the work is about subordinate, how do you make businesses do better? So medicine is all driven by, making companies more profitable, even chemistry or biology. So it seems to be that business is driving everything and profit seems to be the one true path. And actually, I thought this, sitting here, when the first set of questions were asked in the session before lunch, there were 3 questions asked, and the first 2 questions were all about business. So, and the relation to business. So it seems to me that, hey, this is the problem about, or this is the milieu that we work in, that it's profits. So, what is CHASS? It seems to me that it's almost like Harry Potter before he went to Hogwarts. If you remember in the movie, he was staying beneath the staircase and he was living a small life there, and then he was discovered and, of course, and taken out to the school. So that seems to be my understanding, that if you compare with the world of business that I put in the previous slide, to the world of CHASS. It's also, to me, unbalanced. The arts side, to me, dominates the CHASS side. So arts, if you look at, relatively speaking, even in the CHASS is unbalanced, is not so important, but arts is really there. It's obviously unfunded. It doesn't have the same level of funding receive of big conferences. And, it's sitting somewhere in some background. Of course, today I was quite pleased to see the 2 ministers and the shadow minister were present. And, it seems to me that, that the challenge of, it seems to be far removed in some sense from the average Australian's life. Now I understand the challenges of football and the matches, the grand final and the previous final, or the Herald Sun reasons. And it's almost as if that the people here who are the CHASS professionals are wizards in their own way. They're doing their own interesting things. This afternoon, just before this, there was a really fascinating topic about theology. And there seems to be so different from the muggles who go out and make money, to continue with the Harry Potter terminology. So in Australia also there is this gap, and it's certainly getting wider. It's, of course, getting narrowed. Last week, the Australian newspaper had this magazine for an advertisement from Melbourne University for a graduate school of humanities and social science. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. This is actually disproving my hypothesis. If this graduate school can take out a full-page ad in the Australian, which is probably not cheap, that means there is some market, there is some connection. So maybe I'm turning wrong, but for sure, and this challenge is also seen about, education and, businesses, business being the critical thing is seen in this book that is there in our doc packs. In this book, the first chapter, first lecture is by Barry Jones. And Barry Jones, I was reading in the morning in the break, and it seems that he also made this point that the education system is geared towards managerialism, as he calls it, as opposed to learning for the sake of learning. So if this is the case in Australia, it's probably actually far worse in India. In India, it's estimated there are 350,000 people who are doing their MBAs at any given time. And there are far fewer historians, anthropologists, social scientists. And those who study these courses also actually don't practice them. They use this as a stepping stone for examinations to get into what in India as government jobs are much safer. You can't be fired from government. So even if you've studied some of the CHASS disciplines, you look at, you don't actually practice them. And the business side seems to drive this further. In the first week of September, the Cambridge University held a CHASS conference in India. And while they did have sessions on many other interesting things, the very first session, which I've got the program, said the global financial crisis in India. So I was wondering, how the heck does the CHASS conference of even Cambridge University have to talk about the global financial crisis? I mean, okay, then it talked about Delhi and the capital city and some other subjects which are somewhat more related to CHASS, but it seems to me that everyone is talking about business. And Delhi, of course, is also like the Melbourne University setting up a new CHASS university. Hopefully that will lead to more interesting things. And if you survey elsewhere in the world, I'm just giving you a very simplified, I'm sure there are nuances to this that I'm not fully aware, and I'm trying to simplify for the sake of simplifying, that, if you go to Singapore and Hong Kong, it's all the time that they're just talking business. Business, what are you doing? What's the next deal that you can do? And of course, in the Middle East, Qatar is now separating. They're out there, got so many museums, and they're building up their, arts side. And we look at Latin America from an outsider India point of view. Hey, they've got great literature, but what else is, so many Nobel laureates and so many others. In Africa, is anthropology, but what else? So it seems to me that if there is a gap in the business sector and the CHASS sector in Australia, that gap is much wider in the developing world, between the two sides, so to say, between the wizards and the muggles. And then I sort of came to this, is this really only a luxury that rich countries, and the rich countries in the world are grouped under the OECD, which is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and there are 34 of the richest countries in the world from this. And what about the other countries? Don't we also need to do as much of this and learn from this, and what is their connection? And it seems to me that while the 34 OECD countries are, between them have a population of 1.25 billion and a GNP of 42 trillion US dollars, there are 5 countries that form the BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, Indonesia, China, and South Africa. And they have a population which is more than the OECD countries, and their GNP is not too bad, but these are growing much faster. So hopefully, even if the richer countries of the world have a relatively better, has disciplines and has importance and has knowledge, and the poorer countries don't, but since the poorer countries are actually growing faster than the richer countries, hopefully in the years to come, the gap between India and Australia will narrow in the importance and the importance of the humanities, arts, and social sciences. And there's just some statistics that the OECD growth rate in 2010 for the 34 countries average is 3.8, China was 10.4, India was 8, and Indonesia 6. So the point I'm trying to say is that even though the developing countries who might think that CHASS is a luxury for them, they're growing much faster and growing richer, and then which is an economic truism. So hopefully there will be the space and the creation to have such events and conferences in all of these developing countries. So if I go back to the business point, the point I'm trying to say, if you talk to any CEO of a multinational company, or you read about in a business magazine, in a global business magazine, Fortune or Economist or Forbes or whatever, or if you read the Harvard Business Review, there is a huge complaint from all the companies that it is really very difficult to do business. Yes, we know that these markets are growing very fast, and yes, there is huge buying power, but we don't actually ever get around to making profits. And we might be selling, but the competition, and this is true for all parts. Whether in Africa is a difficult place, Brazil is a different place, China, India, Indonesia, Russia. So then when I was thinking about this, what are the things that is missing in all of this? What are multinational companies who are the big drivers of growth and the big bad boys of business? What are they really missing in these markets when they go out and sell there, when they come out and sell in all of these countries? So the answer that seems to come to me is what they're actually missing is the people and the human dimension, which is the topic of this conference. They're not understanding what people really want, what are their concerns, what are their interests. So yes, and by economic statistics, the average Chinese can now afford to buy so-and-so class of goods, and they are actually buying them, and so are the average Indian, but it's not so easy. So that's why this title of this conference is really very interestingly named, and is a strong link to what businesses need to understand. And what they don't realize is that consumers are, people first, and as they get richer, as I've showed you in the previous slides, that as you get richer, their complex human dimensions, which we are learning today and we learn tomorrow, are becoming increasingly important. It's not just that I can, afford to buy a certain product, but why would I choose to buy this? And what is the connection? So there's this really great book on globalization written by Thomas Friedman. It's called The Lexus and the Olive Tree. It was written in 2001, and he's the foreign affairs editor of the New York Times, and he has this column. And it really impressively explains this. So the question that I feel that is relevant to us is that, eventually I might buy your Lexus, but you first understand the Lexus represents the business side of globalization, and the olive tree represents the culture and the connections to the rootedness to your own place and your own, region or your own state or your own religion. So if you want to sell me a Lexus, you should first understand where I'm coming from. What is my olive tree? What does it matters to me? And that's the point that I'm trying to say, broadly speaking, that if businesses want to prosper, they need to connect with people. And there can be many, ranges of this olive tree. So I'm trying to relate to the CHASS discipline. So what is the history of the olive tree that I hold? The olive tree as a symbolism that hold here. What are the symbols of other olive trees, of other olive groves? It's not just one tree or one thing that I hold, but a group of things that matter to me. The point that, Ali was saying earlier in the morning about different things that make someone come together. And how does this define my life? Is it just, plays, or, is it, how do I react to the olive tree? Is it poetry or prose? What is the connection of women to have with this olive tree, or immigrants in a country like Australia, but also everywhere else? And, as you read in this book more that, what will the connections be to science? And I was talking to the gentleman from the Science Innovation Australia outside about apps and stuff. So that, in future there may not even be an olive tree, but maybe there will be an olive tree app for all of our tablets, But is that enough to explain the relative importance of this tree and what we hold dear as citizens and as people, and what it matters to us? And in the time I was in Australia last time for 2 months, something which I had never thought about in the Australian context and how important it seemed to matter and resonate with most Australians was the Anzac Day experience. And I attended the dawn service at the shrine in Melbourne, and I was looking at that and saying that, hey, that's something that about Australia one doesn't even imagine. It's not there, part of the cookery, reality shows, and the cricket and the other things. And that is also part of the cultural, and it is going strong over 100 years later. So if an Indian business wanted to sell to Australia, and if it didn't understand how Anzac has fashioned the Australian culture and the Anzac Day and the whole part of sort of walking towards early in the morning, and this as part of the cultural context of what makes Australians, it wouldn't succeed. Or forget any Indian. Suppose there's a Korean business or a Japanese business or an American business. So the olive tree in this case that I personally saw was the Anzac Day experience. But there are many other things that people in Australia will hold dear, and so would other countries. So if you want to go out and sell to them, you better get a sense of what matters to them. And you need all of these disciplines. It's not just, so there's this nice diagram that's there on the website of the CHASS, which I took from there, which I've borrowed it. There are different reasons why you buy a particular product or service. So you've got to understand, visual arts and classical studies, law and theater, social sciences, media, sociology, Aboriginal traits, Torres Strait Island in this case, architecture. All of these disciplines that comprise CHASS, and there is this is only a small list, there are probably a much longer list of disciplines, would matter if you wanted to understand how to sell your products and services to a richer and richer audience. And to take something that all of us seem to hold very dear, the next slide talks about cell phones. Between the iPhone 5 and the Galaxy S3, after all the patent wars and all the fighting that they do with the courts, these two phones still need to be sold. And to round the world, to different parts of the world, to people who already have a phone. It's not even that everyone who's buying an iPhone 5 or a Galaxy already has a mobile phone. So it's not that he's trying to get something, that to replace, oh, you don't have one, please get this. So they've really got to think about how and why they'll make you buy this phone. And Apple and Samsung are certainly not selling them only on their technology features that, I have a faster processor and I have a bigger screen. And that's not the only reason why you're buying an Apple or a Samsung. There are many, many human criteria that you think about. Many of these and they have actually spent time understanding the CHASS disciplines when they shape what they will sell. And if you read about Steve Jobs and how much time he spent about worrying about the sort of finer things, and the inputs in the design and the promotion of these phones and their cloud-based services. I mean, Siri, which is the Apple 4S, those who have Apple 4S and Apple 5, is entirely, there's so much thinking that has gone into that, even in the modulation of the voice, which would have come only not by the MBA side of the world, not by the muggles of money side, but by the wizards of CHASS. And in fact, the Galaxy S3's entire advertising thing is designed for humans. It's almost as if they knew that we were talking about the human dimension. So, it's as if the company, Samsung, has really thought this through and said, hey, we can't sell our products just because we say that they're the technologically the latest, fastest, that won't work. We have to say they're designed for humans. And the two companies that forgot about this, Nokia and BlackBerry, who focused only on engineering and businesses, have now realized that it doesn't sell. Just by sheer engineering power, which Nokia is to make these really indestructible phones. Everybody makes indestructible phones. BlackBerry, it was simple for businesses, but now with an Apple iPhone or a Galaxy or an Android, you can get the same email, so there's no reason to buy a BlackBerry. That's why Nokia and BlackBerry, which did not look at the humans element and the design for humans, are failing, whereas these two companies and these two phones are succeeding, especially when they're selling to around the world. It's not that there is iPhone 5 is different here versus somewhere else, but they've incorporated and they've thought about what would appeal to Australia and what would appeal to India and what would appeal to the United States. So if you come back to all of these, what does this mean for businesses in Australia? And so now the next few slides talk about how can Australian businesses connect and learn from the humanities, arts, and social sciences for their work. So the first one comes down to, yes, of course, there's a huge minerals boom that you're exporting, but you're also exporting, your movies, your museums, your marketing services, and advertising, consulting events like this, apart from, of course, cars and, manufactured widgets. But, so that's one is the products and services. And in that also, if you look at the high-end services, I looked at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade brings out a yearly statistic about the composition of Australia's trade. So if you want to export, Australia is exporting high-end services like consulting, $2.8 billion, architecture, tourism, education itself is 15 billion. You know, if you need to do all of this, if you want to export services as opposed to products. At the previous slide, which is about cell phones, which are products, also said that you need to understand humans and customers. So if you are exporting services, you certainly need to have a deeper understanding of your customers and, you know, potential customers. And you know, this is not just Australia, the rest of the world also is thinking about what would make people buy their products. So whether it is Hollywood, you know, which is movies are being increasingly tailor-made to sell in different audiences outside America. The way Hyundai markets itself, especially in India, or the way the Chinese telecom company Huawei is marketing itself in Australia, in Africa. So there is a huge, if you want to sell abroad, you've got to understand what people in other countries and their cultures. And this was the point that I think one of the speakers earlier referred to, Monica Attari. She also said that if you want to sell to middle-class Asians, you've got to understand what makes them tick. The second thing is, you know, first other countries, but you've got to understand our own, you know, Australia, which has so many people from so many different countries. And if you want to sell more here, and the last time I was in Melbourne, I remember walking across this bridge, Sandridge Bridge, I think, and they have these little glass sort of designs, one for each each of the 128 countries that have sent people to Melbourne and where they've come from and what bridge. It's a pedestrian bridge on the river, Yarra River. And it seems to me a great example of how, you know, in one place, everything about humanities, arts, and social sciences have come together. You know, there's a history about each of these countries, there's a geography about these countries, there is a visual arts about this, and there is a, you know, a physical location where you can see this, and it collectively comes through as something so interesting. But if you want to understand the cultures, crafts, cuisines, the cities of these 128 and more, somebody here earlier in the day was saying that when you start looking at the number of languages that children who are age 5, when they start school, more than 200 languages. So how are you going to, you know, if I was an Australian business, I have to understand, you know, the background of people from Albania and people from Vietnam and people from Sri Lanka, you know. And so let's, for instance, take one of your big banks, Westpac, and if it has to sell to the Indian immigrant market, it must understand what makes Indians, and we are not just one monolith, but India itself has 28 states and so many religions. You know, otherwise some Indian bank will come, ICICI Bank is India's leading private sector bank, and that will come and set up branches here and start selling to Indian citizens. So the second slide talks about selling within Australia. The first one was selling abroad. The third, you know, marketing department, you know, the people who work in businesses and in organizations in Australia come from so many parts of the world too. So, you know, one is, of course, marketing departments need to understand but the HR departments of medium-sized and large organizations, you know, also need to understand, or there's a very useless management speak called deploy, you know, so they need to deploy the understanding of humanities, arts, and social sciences to get the most out of their own workplaces. In this, the organizers of this conference itself, there are speakers who come like me from other parts of the world, and even the staff here, you know, I know there's somebody I remember, you know, who was not originally from Australia. So if you don't understand where all the people who are in your organization, where they're coming from, and that too historically, culturally, geography, how are you going to sort of work together in an organized way to achieve the collective goals of the organization? And it's not just the collective goals, it's also people work in organizations to achieve their own individual goals as well. It's not just you're earning, you know, working just for the salary that you get, because, okay, times are tough, but if you didn't like the place, you'd probably find another job that you found was more interesting. So it has to be an organization that matters, and if the organization understands what matters to you, how will you sort of contribute most? And there's this really interesting website blog post that said, you know, on the Washington Post, somebody wrote a thing that, you know, Silicon Valley also needs humanities students far more than it needs engineers and techies. That they of course need, but they also need humanities and students. The fourth side, you know, look at businesses. Businesses, you know, are usually always against government and politics, and they're perpetually lobbying away, and they're, and they keep making the economic case that, this is if the government was to do this and if it was to do that, this is how we will benefit and the country will benefit. But often they fail, and that's because while economics is important for politicians, but in politics and the politics is expressed by individual citizens, sometimes and hopefully more often than not, trumps economics. Even if it is obviously a economically sensible thing to do, you don't do it because it doesn't make politically sense. And politics is shaped by the way beings work and our concerns as individuals. So if businesses were to work with the history, arts, social science group, it can probably help shape the government's agenda in a much better way than by merely making the economic case or the productivity case or the case driven by sheer numbers, that if the government did this, this is what would happen. And let's take the case of, last time I was here, there were these two big controversies about mining and carbon tax, and the businesses went on and on whining, about the fact that, this is a lousy tax and it will affect us and it is no good and competitiveness will come down. But eventually the tax was imposed, and eventually the carbon tax was also imposed. So all the whining and all the nasty comments in the Australian newspaper and everything else didn't seem to work, because finally the government of the day, listening to citizens and of course to the Green Party MPs who support them, finally managed to impose a law, because politics has, as I said, trumps economics. So that's the fourth reason why businesses should work. The fifth is, of course, it's a truism that the world is changing at a faster rate and it's growing. But it's not just that the world in one big global concept is changing, but it's also individuals and countries and the nation that are changing fast. And this accelerating change, which is also a truism, to understand that, you need to sort of think about history and religion and culture and and diversity studies as well as media. So for example, I have just thought of 3 points that I would really like to know what is going to happen, and it cannot be answered by mere economics and mere looking at business schools. So what does the Arab Spring, for instance, will it mean new markets, and for whom and what category of people will it, or how would we are reading the newspapers, rising nationalism in China, how will it play out? And what will this mean for the other two countries? So this cannot be answered by just looking at economics, because economically there is no reason for any tension. And this has been proved for a long time. And that, just because you're trading with one country doesn't mean that you're not going to have, disagreements with that country. And for instance, famously, before World War I, Germany and England were each other's two respective largest trading partners. Yet they went to war. So it didn't stop the fact that I'm doing business with you. Or in the Australian case, we talk so much about multicultural, we heard it today. What would happen 5 years hence, 6 years hence? To understand all of this from a business point of view, you cannot use just graphs, charts, economics, and past marketing data. You have to really go out and talk to professors and academicians and practitioners of the CHASS disciplines to get a better sense of all of these questions. Similarly, the last point about this is that there's a huge amount of money that is locked up in these big long-term funds, the super funds or the future fund that Australia has, and insurance funds. And from what I was given to understand, they're collectively close to 2 trillion Australian dollars. And all of these funds are looking for stable long-term investments. And the point that I was making, that economic forecasting is not enough to just get the best returns over the medium term and long term. And the CHASS disciplines can really help Australia predict what the future is going to be. It cannot be answered by economics that will China ever be a democracy in the next 10, 15, 20 years. Perhaps economic theory will say that at a certain level of per capita income, countries are more likely to be democracies. So on that basis, maybe 25 years out, but maybe how will it be there faster? Or how will, within Australia, what would be the change if the mines sort of just went out and the mining ended? Or last week, I understand the federal government, parliament debated and defeated the issue of gay marriage. But is this foreseeable? If it's reached a stage now, in 4 years' time or 3 years' time or 5 years' time, will it be legal? And if so, what does this mean for businesses? Yes, of course, one immediate thing is that the wedding market will go up, but apart from that, is there anything else that might happen? Will gay partners staying together, will they start, can I start having bank accounts and long-term saving accounts with them? So to understand whether this is foreseeable or not, you need to understand humans and politics and the messier side of things as opposed to the sort of pure business side. And of course, when you think about startups, the previous slides were about 6 slides were about big companies. And if you want to start businesses in today's day and age, you need, of course, business skills, and you need to sell and market and have a website and, deal with banks and maintain accounts. But first you have to have an idea that will fly. And, and to get that idea, you need to understand what customers want and what is the unique thing that people are doing. And most businesses that people start up are around cities and services. I mean, things that are manufactured and products are all coming from China. So there's nothing that an entrepreneur in Australia, his things that he's going to buy for day-to-day use are coming to be bought, probably made in Australia or in China. But if you want services, then you've only got to think about what people want. So restaurants, which seem to be a really new thing that in Australia, or not always new, but it has suddenly become very important. You got to understand culturally what do people like to eat. If you want to make if you want to have a different restaurant from all the hundreds and hundreds of restaurants all over the country, you've really got to think about, hey, what would send? Or in Melbourne, I saw this really interesting gym, Hard Rock, where you have to climb up a rocky wall, and this seems to be driven by adventure and the reason to have TV. So this is not driven by any economics argument, or festivals which try to promote human curiosity. Floriade, of course, here. So there's the business about Floriade. There's so many things happening in and around Floriade, that are businesses. Or I was traveling to a small town last time, Sheffield, and every year in Tasmania, it has a mural festival. So if you want to start a business, you've got to understand, what makes people tick, and therefore find something you want to sell. Even our friends from Onru, they said their dream eventually was to start their own studio and start their own business. So if you look at it this way, even for startups, the MBA skills are important, but the HASS disciplines are still more important, because having an MBA will not tell me what business I should get into. Yes, it will tell me how to be more efficient and how to manage it well, but the basic idea of what I should be selling, what product or service or what business, can only come from having a sense of what citizens are looking out for. So then you come back to the other side. This is all about business. Now I'm trying to finally talk to the politics and international policy side. So the fundamental point I made was that rising prosperity is making it easier, about the culture. So it is not just, enough to sell stuff. Similarly, if you look at it on the same parallel point about prosperity, rising democracy in all parts of the world, including the way information flows through SMSs and mobiles and Twitter, is making it easier for people to resist policies that might be economically correct and might make all kinds of economic sense, but don't appeal to their human concerns and their human interests. So in both cases, I made the earlier case about profits in business, but also in the case about policies. So here's the slide on international cooperation. And here's how I think, the HASS system could make. For instance, the idea of having a CHASS seems so very interesting. And if Australia really wants to promote its soft power, it should, get money from DFAT to help, or AUSAID to help, set up CHASS Philippines or Vietnam or Iraq. This is very ways of working together. And one is just replicating this kind of a system setup. But the other is that, AUSAID itself, there are all kinds of controversies that what does AUSAID do and is it really very effective? And, so if AUSAID were to understand, what makes Philippines or Vietnam or Iraq or Africa or some other countries tricks, and it can only understand that by working with the professors from different HASS colleges. And finally, the third part of the international cooperation is that there are so many migrants in Australia and immigrants, so there may be so many ways to just promote through cross-country HASS dialogues. I mean, famously, India and Pakistan, disagree on so many things, and yet we are united. When we come here, we are sort of Australian citizens first. So there was a conference or a dialogue that promoted, what is common between India and Pakistan, or for that matter, what is common between Israel and Palestine. After all, they do share a history, they do share a geography, they do share anthropology, they do share to some extent, a cuisine, and they do share some extent music. So if you just looked at from a very aspirational thing that may or may not saying that a conference in Canberra that brought Israel and Palestinians to explore their common human dimensions will instantly translate into peace in the West Bank, but it will help, certainly. And so would it between other countries that seem to disagree else in there, but whose migrants who come to Australia are working together and with each other. So finally, if coming back to the Harry Potter analogy, which I thought I should end with, given there's so many young people here, how can the wizards work with the muggles? How can the HASS disciplines, and the all odds is the stock market index. So here's my sort of challenge and thought that maybe the next year's conference, there are 500 Australian companies that are listed on the Sydney Stock Exchange's All Ordinaries Index. The All Ordinaries Index is in short called the All Odds, and it's been an index of stock market capitalization for many, many years. So perhaps if you can reach out to get 25 delegates from the 500 companies, 25 may be a large number, but at least in the earlier count, there were 38 speakers in this conference. Maybe there are fewer, so can we get 3 from businesses? And, if you could have sessions about the what and the how of how HASS can work with businesses, that would maybe bring the 2 groups to work together. And within the thing, as I started out by saying that there is an unbalance, in my opinion, between the arts and the H and SS. So how can the arts side of HASS, how can you learn from the relative success and use the arts and the 2 humanities and social science to lift the arts to lift up the humanities? So are different arts events and arts functions, can they have more collaboration with the humanities side? Can the arts events have collaboration with social sciences? So just building on the relatively high profile of the arts sector, can humanities and social science sectors also benefit? So if that could be something that I thought we could all look forward for next year. Thank you so much.
Fascinating. Business and HASS, that sounds like an interesting combination to me. Are there any questions for HASS? Harsh?
Yes.
Yes, at the back. Why don't we ask them? Are there any arts people in here? There you go. She is.
Yes.
Do you have any case studies that you might want to bring forward at this stage?
Well, only, I guess, the national, no, not off the top of my head, other than national companies that represent us nationally and in Australia.
I might pick that up. I work for the
Please.
Australian Council for the Arts. I'm the head of arts development, which is a division. Look, I think if you separate out the aim, just call it the arts, that's where the problem starts. We're talking about creativity, we're talking about ingenuity, we're talking about innovation, and those parts of the way we think and work as society are embedded across so many parts of every part of society, essentially. So the arts are fundamental, I think, to the way society works. Whether they're given the credit and the kudos for
Would you like to respond to that, Harsh?
I only understand from what I see in the media and think that, there are so much coverage about art galleries and museums and paintings and music, but the coverage about history or anthropology or theology or geography is so much lesser, relatively speaking. So if arts is relatively speaking a more successful side, if you had to break, that's why you have separately called HASS. In that, the A part seems to be doing relatively better than the H and SS, and there are things that H and SS can learn from A's success, and A in turn can work with H, so that if A is having some function, the H side also benefits and the SS side also benefits. Since the definition is HASS, so I just segregated the three into the three constituent parts.
Any response?
Yes, from what little, I am not a citizen here, nor am I such a long-term person to be able to give you a more nuanced view that actually it is or is not, but I can only give this relative thing that arts seem to be relatively better off. But across the whole, that is only for my last slide, and the last point of the last slide. Everything else is that they're all in the same boat, vis-a-vis businesses and vis-a-vis reaching out to customers.
Another comment to the back here.
Isn't the question more about functional embedded knowledge?
About?
Functional embedded knowledge, like that it's accepted and we're all happy to have knowledge about how different countries in Asia work differently or the same, and how different types of people in Australia, although it's sometimes problematic to categorise, work differently. And that's where everything falls together. It's not about this is social science, it's just about this is useful knowledge that we should all know more about. And unfortunately, it's not given to us in the media. It's a major learning medium.
Sure. So I'm not sure what the exact question is.
Embedded knowledge in terms of educational standards, educational...
Okay. I'm not sure if I can answer this, but I can only sort of refer back that even if it's there, you need to have more of this for companies that want to sell abroad. And you have to understand more. It is not enough to sort of make linear extrapolation saying that if you become certain stage of wealthy, you're likely to buy this and this. You may still not buy this, products and services. So you have to really understand this, and you have to understand how other countries think and how people behave and what makes them behave, which is not just the bare minimum that, okay, this is the history of India, or this is the history of Indonesia. But from a business point of view, so what does it make? What are Indonesians worried about? What kind of things do they aspire to have? Is there something that we have that will satisfy those intangible needs of people? As I was saying, as you get richer, your tangible needs of getting a house and food on the table and some basic car and some cell phone are taken care of. It's the intangible needs that you get more money when you can aspire to have an iPhone 5 versus a basic standard Nokia, which meets your tangible needs. But the iPhone 5 meets your intangible needs.
So what does the education sector think of these ideas? What about the TAFE sector? I see a representative of the TAFE sector over there. Do you have a comment? Zing. Also happens to be a member of the CHASS board, so she must have an interesting idea about this one. Not that I'm putting the note there. Anything?
There's a lady there.
Yes, yeah. Maybe cross-discipline relationships in the education process that might build up the HASS side of things, Yes.
I think that in one of our previous session on VET, we were looking at how a lot of our the vocational and educational side of VET, we actually sort of embed all of those things across our learning. And I think we said much what was saying in terms of the arts sector, that you actually look at a whole range of disciplines and all of those things are embedded across a whole range of different areas. So in some respects, it is functional knowledge. It's something that we would actually embed in those things we would do, which is the edge of education marrying up with vocational in that sense.
Okay.
Well, I was just going to say I very much like the wizard bubble analogy, and I'm wondering if there's a Voldemort.
Oh, there are lots of Voldemorts. You think about the Australian is a Voldemort. You think about it for the the Liberal Party, Julia Gillard is a Voldemort. For you think about it, business itself is a Voldemort. It's one bad big guys who are only interested in themselves, only making money, and us chaps who are trying to change the world and do good things. So Voldemort, you can find all kinds of, Voldemorts. But the point is that the Hogwarts cannot succeed by itself. You might train the best wizards, but if you don't work with the Muggles, as the later novels started talking about, they try to protect the British Prime Minister and stuff like that, you won't succeed. They'll still go their separate paths.
So are you suggesting that perhaps a wizard with an MBA might be more helpful in these circumstances?
That's the sort of target that I said, that next
There you
year's
go.
conference you
Perfect.
must connect with businesses and...
Okay, all right.
That's the last slide title.
Harry
Get them on board to explore the details.
All right, I think we'll end there. And thank you, Harsh, once again for a very interesting comparison of the two ends of a particular spectrum. Could we thank